off and the clock has started.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 19 of Relationships Through the Looking Glass. And as we have been talking about domestic violence awareness this month, this episode will be no different. However, the focus is going to be on the Black community and what's going on there. We all have been told or aware of the hashtag Black Love. And we want to kind of unpackage that a little bit in what's really going on within our relationships and our communities, and really kind of dig deep into some areas that people aren't really talking about or might not even be aware that there's an issue. But before we jump into this, I want to welcome our guest to the episode that I purposely requested because the topic is so dense and I knew they would bring a wonderful expectation. Well, my expectation is that they're going to bring a wonderful piece to this. So we're going to start with Nick with Forbidden Fruit Podcast. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Nick and he's going to let us know about his podcast, why he does what he does, and why he feels Black love is so important. So over to you, Nick.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. So a little bit about me, my podcast, I should say, Forbidden Fruit Podcast is a podcast centered around those eureka moments. I call them in the show bite of the apple moments. It plays off the story of Adam and Eve where they were in the garden and they ate the fruit. And they instantly became knowledgeable of good and evil. Well, for me, it's instead of damnation, the flip side of that is, enlightenment. So each episode is designed to awaken you to the knowledge of a better you. So we could talk about the knowledge of love, the knowledge of mortality, the knowledge of conscious parenting, the knowledge of attraction, the knowledge of anxiety, and all these other topics. And so that's the concept of the show. I created the show because I realized that just over the course of, the past 6 years, I've done a lot of growth just dealing with being a single father. And I was talking to, someone on social media, and then they were asking me for advice, and I was kind of giving them all these book recommendations and all those other kind of things. And I was like, okay, I'm at the point where I can start giving this information away. And then my cousin, ironically enough, Angel Erica from Reasons Why podcast had me on, and we got to talking about, just relationships and dating and all that other kind of stuff. And all this information just started coming out again. And so that episode actually did very well on her podcast. And so it was just, I just love to connect with people. I love growing. And I think you do that through these kind of conversations. And, and so I'm excited about that. The term Black love. So for me, this might be unpopular, but I don't, in my mind, love is love, right? I actually did an episode on it called The Knowledge of Love. And so my understanding or definition of what love is accepting a person for who they are, despite what they may or may not do, based on the fact that the unwavering conviction that they're a good person, right? So that means, let's just say it opens the door to love more people because it's not always tied to intimacy, right? I think typically when people think of love, it's if they say, I love you, then now I owe you the intimate aspects of who I am. And that's not necessarily the case. That's just me when I tell somebody I love them. It just means I am convinced that you're a good person despite what you may or may not do. And you can never change that. I've made the commitment to love you and hold you in this regard and for the rest of my life. And so now culturally, we do things different than, other cultures or whatever. So it's expressed differently, than just say white cultures or Hispanic cultures or whatever. So it'll look different, I believe, from demographic to demographic. But I think ultimately love is what it is.
I love that. And I probably on another episode or just one-on-one, I want to pick your brain a little bit more about that. I had someone give me that same expression or example of what you just described as love. And I was so confused by it because he said the same thing. He said, love is love. That's what he feels. It might not be the romantic element that I feel I should be receiving, but when I love you, I will love you forever and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, really? Like, that's so interesting to me. So it's so interesting to hear it from somebody else. And I'm going to check out that episode as well to learn more about that concept, because it has been a growth element for me. Like, I'm like, how can you love somebody forever when they can be a jerk and like treat you horribly and And then he was like, well, that's not unconditional love, is it? That's conditional. And I'm like, I never thought of it that way.
Exactly. It's love as a decision. I read a book called The Road Less Traveled, and it actually referred to love as a discipline. It requires discipline to love somebody.
Wow, it does. Even when they're acting like complete butts. Yeah. Ew. I'm sitting on that for a little bit, but thank you. I'm go segue into a whole nother area. Thank you. And I'm so excited that you're here to discuss this topic, because I just feel you're going to bring a lot of depth to this conversation. And I'm going to jump over to co-host Nicole now. When we use the term Black love, or when you hear Black love, what comes to mind, and why do you think it's a movement per se that's so important that we keep seeing hashtag Black love and everything like that?
Okay, sorry. For me, when I see and hear and think about love, Black love specifically, it's building together, like a progressive growth. And I see the ability to be vulnerable with each other and, basically make a commitment to grow something together, like they're moving together, they're growing together. And, I agree that love is an action and it's also a choice. So they are choosing to do that. And so to me, it's beautiful that they both have, opened up themselves to be vulnerable and made a commitment to grow together. And, obviously not two people are going to be perfect. So part of that love action choice is accepting or working through whatever their differences are. So I think that's important, not only for like single Black people, but also for our children to see that, not everything is perfect, and to actually see Black people coming together to make the choice to grow and be better together, as opposed to just fighting all the time and negative and, working through some things. It's not always going to be Instagram perfect. So that's why I think it's important for us to see and value Black love.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going to be a segue into our next part of this discussion. Do you find, and this is for Nick, do you find that there are some unique requirements or just expectations when people look at our community and think of love? Are we expected to behave differently, or are we behaving differently, in your opinion?
So when you say they, are you talking about company? You talking about
social,
us?
like everybody else except us.
Okay,
Yeah.
You're talking about company.
Yeah,
all right.
Company.
Honestly, I mean, any situation when you're on the outside looking in, it's going to be almost like hearsay, right? So, and I know you've seen it like on, online, where somebody to say, a white person is saying, well, the Black community should do this, or just like
right.
In Congress, you'll have, a room full of men talking about women should, have this and that.
Right.
So for me, I mean, I don't really get caught up in that, because it's like me talking about something that, like talking about, rocket science. I'm not a rocket scientist. So I'm not someone you should be listening to about that. So, I mean, if someone not inside of the house, this company is trying to talk about what we're doing in the house, then like, you don't really know what you're talking about. So I don't really hold any weight with that.
But what about us? What about inside the house?
Now, inside the house. Now we kicked the company out. So for me, if getting down to it, and I was mentioning before we started recording, it was just like, I think it all starts with love. I think everything starts with self-love, to be honest. And I think for us, I mean, you even see it in, in Black culture, like just say hip hop culture or whatever. It's like, we're degrading women. You're nothing if you don't have this, where, I'll take your girl, whatever, I'll kill you, and we'll sell each other drugs and stuff like that. And so it's like, so it's like that mindset, right? Like, I mean, why are we glamorizing this kind of stuff as opposed to actually, glamorizing love with each other? And I don't think that that's how we all are collectively, but it's just like, that's what we put on the screen, right? Like, that's what we share with the world.
Exactly.
And so I just think that you have to start with self-love. And I honestly think of last year when you had the social unrest. The thing that I loved about us is it was this one video of this police officer. It was a Black police officer. He had a little shield, And then the one guy walked up to him with a camera. He kind of started like roasting him, like, man, you couldn't even get the big shield, man. You know, they give him a little shield or whatever. And then like he started laughing, the cop stopped laughing. And it was like, for me, it was like, even despite what we're going through, like we gonna find joy, we're gonna find happiness, we're gonna find peace, and we're gonna keep it pushing.
Right.
And so I think a lot of it is just seeing the positive in everything. And I know it can be hard because, you know, specifically growing up in America, I mean, you know, from grade school, they pretty much teach you come from slaves. Like that's all
they
it ever
teach
was.
us. That's right.
Like that's all it ever was. There's nothing before that. And so, and then, you know, again, you turn on the news and you see, you know, another, you know, black man dying, or, you know, black women, you know, being abused or gone missing or whatever. And so it's hard to look past that at times to see, like, you know, the positive in it. But I guess for me, I think the biggest thing is to understand like how, even for us to be alive, you know what I mean? Like it's nothing short of a miracle, right? I mean, I don't think people really understood like how bad slavery was.
Right.
Like, I mean, to just so you pretty much had like people like packed like sardines in ships, like no food, you know, pooping on each other, like peeing on each other, all this other kind of stuff, like across the ocean. So even survive that, not to die from being sick of that. And then, you know, the ones that, you know, tried to fight and whatever, and just like committed pretty much an act of suicide because, yo, we're not trying to be slaves. And then the ones that actually made it over,
right,
survived, you know, castration, gator bait turned into, you know, shoes.
There were even plantations where the whole purpose of the plantation was raping the woman to make more. And being that I live in southern, deep South Carolina, that's just to think that was an existence, and you were just raped over and over again, and your children taken over and over again. That is historical trauma.
Yeah, I mean, you even had buck breaking. So you had like where they would take the homosexual slave owners would pretty much like rape the male slaves in front of everybody to make, you know what I'm saying, like to just emasculate them. And so you got that to like the carnival games where they would like take back black babies and like throw balls at them. I mean, like you mean like women being hung, babies, like pregnant women being hung, babies cut out of their bellies, burned alive. I mean, so it's just like, think about it. Anyone in your lineage, from the first person that got on the boat to you now, that anyone in their lineage ever suffered any of that, you wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. So the fact that we're here is a blessing. And it just for me, it kind of goes back to my faith, right? Like, there's no possible way that any individual could survive that without like a higher power.
Absolutely.
And so the fact that even now, I mean, I think that's what you have to look at. I think that's the good that you have to see in every person, in every what you would consider a black person, period. And so I think looking at that as opposed to constantly looking at it from a victim's mentality, yes, it was horrible. Yes, it was terrible. But like, look, not looking at it as this is what I had to go through, but like, look what we overcame. Look at where we are. Like my mom grew up in Marietta, Arkansas, where the kids used to tease her, like the white kids used to tease her, saying the night riders in the bathroom, she's gonna kill you. As a child, I'm talking about like a young elementary age child, to then still wanting to be in education, started off as a janitor and then retired as a principal.
That's outstanding.
So I think you just have to just tweak your perspective and look at yourself that way, because it's not possible for you to love someone more than you love yourself, right? There was a talk on Brene Brown did called the Power of Vulnerability, and she said, you know, even when it comes to your kids, like it is impossible to love someone more than you love yourself. So if you don't love yourself to a certain extent, that you can't love, just say, your kids more than that.
Right.
And so I think for me, like it's easier for me to love other people because I love myself, right? It's like I look at me like me growing involved, like I look at my son growing involved, right? Like, you know, when he was a baby, he would just sit on his back and yell for whatever reason, although he wasn't sad. And then he went to sitting up, and he went to walking, and he went to this. And so it was like every month, every few months, every couple of years, it was like this new development that I was like, okay, what is he going to be into now? Like, what is he going to be interested in now? And so for me, I look at myself like that. And so now it's easy for me to look at everyone else that same way, right? Like everyone is a gift to open. Like, what is your thing? Like, what is your passion? Like, what is your purpose? What are you going to overcome? Like, and so I think we need that more so in our community, because we are in a position where, we literally went from slaves to, like, not too long ago in our lifetime having a man of color in the White House.
Right.
Now we got a woman of color in the vice president, as a vice president. So it's like, at what point do we say, all right, look, we own, like, this is what happened to us. Let's deal with the trauma and anxiety of everything. And then, like, let's collectively get better, because we are definitely in a better position to be grateful for now, as opposed to, if I was born 200, 300, 400 years ago, it'd be a different story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just that information alone, I'm hoping that anyone listening can take that and say, you're absolutely right. Let's look at the perspective. Let's change that victim mentality to not, this happened to me, this happened to my people, this is our historical trauma, to look what we overcame and look what we're doing. If people really join together, if our community really joined together, we would be unstoppable.
It'd be a problem.
It would be a huge problem.
This is the thing, like, if you look at America, like, there's nothing really original about America. Even like the food, if you think about it, if you go out to eat, it's going to be Mexican, it's going to be Italian, it's going to be soul food, it's going to be Japanese, Chinese food. Like what is American food? What is American culture? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you say white people came over here from Europe, but what is European about America?
Right.
Absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
The inventions, the things like, the inventions, the building of this country. Like, think about if it wasn't slave labor and they had to, like, actually pay us, like, the value of that even today, right?
Exactly.
So it was like nothing in this country is really from this country. It really comes from us.
Right. Exactly. And we have to figure out ways. And that's one of the purposes of this platform here, is to find ways to bring us together and stop feeding into the dynamic that's being pushed, that's trying to pull Black females and men apart. And it's really trying to push us against one another, because it keeps us weak. It keeps us weak as a whole. And we really have to start having these types of conversations authentically and in a safe space to discuss some of these heavy topics that we're about to go into. So Nicole, when you hear the term Black love, like we just discussed, do you think there's a different expectation for our community within our community? Like, you see the videos of the weddings and they're dancing and there's so many different things that you see within our Black community that you're like, yeah, like, that's expected. Do you feel that there is a different expectation within our community about what Black love is versus what the others are?
I think because of those generational wounds, that we are attempting to form our own definition of what Black love looks like or feels like, or, being expressed as. So I feel like we are dealing with generational emotional trauma wounds being passed on and not healed and not addressed. So it's like we are creating our own version of that. So I think what's unique is, yes, we actually did survive that. And then the different levels of self-awareness within the Black community, and then the different levels of healing that we've done to create whatever our version of Black love in this day and this time is. So that's what I think is the difference between, like, what company, as Nick says, their version of love is versus our version of love.
Right. I agree. Now we're in the house. We're not going to be talking about company anymore for the rest of the conversation. We're going to be talking about, we're in the house, the door's shut, and we're all sitting down, and we're about to have a conversation about us and what's going on within our relationships. And as I was preparing for this podcast, in complete transparency, I work in trauma. I work with crime victims. I see homicides, rapes, domestic violence, child abuse. That's my everyday experience. But when I do the job, I don't look at the race per se, as in just everybody as a whole, and making sure everybody's supported and has what they need to start their healing. So for this, I had to dig deep, and oh my goodness, what I saw and what we found and what we're about to talk about, I'm still processing. So let's just talk about Black women in general. We were talking about the government. In one study, it shows that Black women vote at higher rates than any other voting rate than within groups of men and women, any other ethnic groups with men and women during the last two presidential elections. But we are the most underrepresented at every level in the federal and state political offices. And there was the whole saying and movement about how, you know, it was the Black woman who put Obama in the White House the second time around and everything else, and what our voting power was with Biden and everything else. And I'm not trying to make this a political conversation. I'm just focusing on the power of the Black woman within the politics. However, we're the most underrepresented. And that's something to think about. And also that Black families depend on Black women's earnings. The same study showed that 8 out of 10 or 80% of Black mothers were the sole breadwinners in their family. And if you even look at it there, more than 6 in 10 or 62% of Black women are in the workforce and working. So there's so much misinformation that's out there about our community as a whole. And I kind of wanted to highlight that. And that just the importance of Black women in our society is huge. So when we kind of scale down a little bit closer about the relationship between men and women and the Black love, right? The relationships where that's concerned, the statistics start to take a dark turn. And that's what I want to focus on today. The violence that we see within our own relationships, we're going to be focusing on, and maybe try to find a headway through on what can be done as we talk about these things. The most current study with the Violence Policy Center, Black females are the most, when it comes to the correlation of the other ethnic groups, will be murdered. We're twice as high as white females, and we accounted for 14% of the female population, while 20% of the females killed by males were Black. But the most alarming statistic I saw was 93% of all homicides of Black females was from a Black man. 93%. And I'm still trying to process that. So while I take a step back from that, I'm going to pass it over to Nick. When you hear that statistic, and for anybody who's huffing and puffing, don't get mad at me. These are the numbers. I'm just reading the numbers. So if you want to get upset, we need to get upset at what's causing the numbers. So as I pass the mic back to Nick, when you hear the statistic that 93% of homicides of Black females were done by a Black man, what does that do to you?
It's it's frustrating. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I don't know, not to deviate the conversation, but it's almost kind of like that kind of like the feminist movement, where it's like, you know, you'll have like white women, you know, and women of color kind of fighting for these rights, or come like say voting, right? All the women were fighting for the voting rights, but then like white women were the only ones to get their votes. But you know, like Black women still had to deal with like the racism, right? So it's kind of like, that's what like I feel like Black women are dealing with. You got the sexism, and then you got to deal with the layer of racism on top of that. And so, I mean, but this is like when you were talking about those statistics when it comes to women, like I think Black women are also like the most educated demographic. I mean, am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. I'm looking at that statistic right now where it shows that the share of Black women with a bachelor's degree has increased by 23%, making Black women the group of women with the second largest improvement in obtaining higher education. So the narrative that has been pushed for so long that we're lazy, we're ignorant, it's not true.
Also more entrepreneurial, I believe.
Absolutely.
Well.
And yeah, the statistic there was the number of businesses owned by Black women increased by 178% over the past 10 years, which is the largest increase among all racial and ethnic groups of men and women. And you have two entrepreneurs on the call with you right now.
Right.
Right.
So this is the thing. So you have to, in my mind, just hearing that, like, the problem isn't like Black women. So you have to completely like remove them from what's, although I know, I'm going to say this is happening to Black women, but you have to completely remove them from the situation, because this is obviously like more entrepreneurial, you know what I mean? More educated, the breadwinners. And I mean, because for me, I grew up with a single mom, right? So that was the case for me. Like, she was the only breadwinner when I was a kid. So I just think that, again, like, it's a lot of Black men looking at, Black women the way that they look at themselves, which is not in a high regard. And so I guess I think of, let's just say, hip hop music, and I hate to use that because this is such an extreme when it comes to like Black culture, but like hip hop music, right? Like, you can turn on a hip hop song, and we're always talking about like killing each other, and we're gonna do this to each other. I'm gonna fight you, and this, that, and the third, right? But when you get somebody like that guy that killed George Floyd, when nobody rising up about that,
right?
All these people talking about gang banging and killing each other. There's no talk of retaliation when it comes about, like someone out, when company tries to come in the house and and tear, kill us and tear us down, right? So again, it's like you feel more comfortable talking about killing a Black man that may have, bumped into you or stepped on your shoes, as opposed to a white man that says, I want to kill you because you're Black.
Right.
You should not be alive because you're Black. So again, like, that's a representation of self-image, right?
And it's interesting that you brought that up too, because I'm like, you never heard a country song where they're saying they about to go roll down the dirt road and shoot up so-and-so's house. Like, you don't hear that.
Exactly.
You don't hear that.
So that's an excellent point, Michelle. But what I was thinking is, we don't control that media portion. So it may have gotten out, but we, as standard people that consume media, it wouldn't get to us because
that's not what sells, right?
Right. So it might be out there, but then it goes back to who is actually controlling our access.
So here's a challenge. Anybody listening, if you can find me a country song where they're talking about rolling up in their big old trucks and shooting up the barn, I want to know, because I think that would be interesting. I'm being a jerk right now, but
I mean, you're not gonna
absolutely, it's the community has been pitted in a space where you're right. That's what sells. That's what brings money in.
But but this is the thing though. Again, like, with social media, we're now in a position to slowly change the narrative, right? Like, you have these big companies, like, again, I hate to say it, like, BET perpetuates a lot.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Absolutely.
And so, we now have a platform to where if we support each other, then, we can get this out, right? Like, it's literally billions of podcasters in the world, right? So we all followed each other, supported each other, did interviews and actually had this dialogue more and more. Then there's no reason that we couldn't, control our own narrative. But again, like, it's so hard to get 10 people on the same page. So imagine like an entire demographic of people on the same page. And the sad thing about it is you're going to have to accept the fact that some people are just not going to be with it.
Right.
Some people are going to be real comfortable in the house with, with master, AC, And so it's just.
And it's like that, the crabs in the bucket mentality that you hear.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? It's like, the power is unity. So why do you feel, or, in your opinion, feel that it's so difficult for people to see that and move towards that?
Well, if you, for literally, centuries, have been told that you're nothing, you're not valued, you're not, you come from slaves, you know what I mean? It's like, like, how do you, it's kind of like that, the fish in the bowl with the partition, right? Like, you put a partition in the middle of the fish bowl, and the fish is just used to not being able to go over there. So you take the partition out, and he just refuses to go over there because in his mind, like, he's just been conditioned to where I can't go that way. I can't be over there. So I just think years and years and years and years of just being devalued to the point where you just believe it. And I think, and this is the big question that I would like to get your opinions on, is like, for me, like I wasn't raised like that. Like I told you the story about my mom, and and I'll be honest, like my mom was in an abusive relationship, and so that being my father, I didn't turn out that way, and my brother didn't turn out that way, not even remotely close to that.
Right.
And so, and even with my son, like I mean, people always coming to me and saying, you with your son all the time, and he's such a well-behaved, thoughtful, caring, sweet leader, and this and that and the third. So it's like, how can, and this is the question, how can two people in the same situation react in such different ways, right? Like, what is the discriminator? How can you have, because my family will say, what, like, I'm so proud of you because you didn't use, how your father was as an excuse
Amen.
to justify you, perpetuating that behavior. But again, you can take somebody in that exact same situation and they say, all right, well, this is just all I know.
Right.
I'm just going to perpetuate this because all I know. So I'm curious as to what you think the discriminator is between.
And I've done trainings. I've done trainings on this. So I'm going to take a step back first and let Nicole go first, because I've done a lot of trainings on this, and I'm so excited that you brought this up, because I think this piece right here might be able to push that pull a little bit further to the goal for some people who are hearing this. So I'll let you go first, Nicole, and then I'll take that question.
For me, just because I am in the emotional intelligence field, I know that we all handle healing and emotional traumas in different ways. So my father was the same thing, domestic violence, and my brother and I, so male and female, raised in the exact same situation. And when I grew up and started doing the work, my brother was in complete denial. You would think we were raised in different households. And I, explained it, and then he explained it, and he didn't see the abuse. But then as we are getting older, so this is now like 15 years later, he's starting to uncover his own pain points and lack of awareness, to where now he's appreciating me, his sister, much more. Whereas before, he viewed me as the one that was dividing the household because I was speaking up about what was going on. So one, it could be the difference between male and female. And then two, the difference between the way we process information, and, our own woundings and our own awareness would equal how we handle or how we receive the lesson and grow from it.
Okay. I guess go ahead.
No, I was just saying awesome.
Yeah. And I it's so fascinating to me, because, and I will say this though, even with me as a parent, like this is so interesting. So my mom was like extremely hard on me, and it kind of came out when I had a son, because I was kind of in the same situation, not like physically abusive, but like emotionally, like manipulative and all sort of kind of stuff. I was 29, she was 29. She was in an unhealthy relationship, I was in an unhealthy relationship, and it was just like, how grandmas are, is like a completely different animal, right? Like the stuff that she used to destroy me for, she's like, hey, you know what, he's, don't get into him about that. But it came out to just having those conversations that she raised me angrily and harshly because of the anger that she had towards my father, and she took it out on me. And then me not really knowing that until I was, 29, when I had my son, I would do that, not subconsciously. And so I wasn't like, didn't really spank my son like that, or was like, verbally abusive, but it was just like, I was so hard on him. So it was not really realistic at all. And then I had a situation where I actually had the knowledge of conscious parenting, where I took him on a ski trip. I bought all this stuff. I was so excited. And then we get there and he's like, Daddy, I'm tired. I want to go home. And so I just completely lost it. And come to find out, like, I tied his boots on too tight. But me just being like, angry, I immediately went to anger, and subconsciously not really realizing that this is being passed down from my mom, who has been mad about the fact that my dad did what he did to her. And, I'm sure that my dad has a story with what happened to him. So it's just the lineage of it. And so, but it takes the conversations and the self-awareness, and for me to love myself, to say, hey, like, this is a mistake that I made, but this is not who I am. And I don't have to really accept this, and I can change it. And so my relationship with my son has gotten significantly better, to where now it's like down the road, he's not going to be that way with his kids, because even though, and I kind of still have my, my moments, but it's like, I'm aware of it now, to where I catch myself. Right. And so I think that It is. I mean, yeah, I was never, I was never a slave. My grandma picked cotton, and my mom and all of my uncles and aunts picked cotton and all this kind of stuff. But it's like you can pass that stuff on,
Absolutely.
but but at some point you do have to like own it, right? Like I'm still like that is my son. I'm responsible for his upbringing. Like I need to not be this way. Why am I like this? And then go about fixing it the best that I can. And then that's what love is like, right? And accepting that, yeah, I've made a mistake, but I'm not a bad parent just because I did this thing.
So you can come do the training with me, because that's pretty much the it's people try to make it so complicated, but here's the thing, it's not. It's a self-awareness that there needs to be change, and then there's the action to do it. That's it. The self-awareness, I will not be like so and so, and then follow through with the actions of not doing it. And I have worked with so many families where one recently where the son saw the stepfather shoot his mom and himself right in front of him. And there's so many different storylines where this child is either going to go one way or the other. The decision or the deciding factor is who is the support system in the life? Who are you following? Do you look up to? And then making the conscious effort, the cognitive decision to say, I will not be that. And what you just did with that example, it was exactly that. Having the awareness and saying, I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm going to do to my children. I'm going to be better than what I saw. Because with trauma, it's in like the episode we just did on trauma bonding. Once you have the awareness of the situation, you have to have that accountability to make a change. And using trauma as an excuse will keep you in victimization mode.
Yeah. So what do you think is the way to go about creating an environment that's normal to come to these conclusions? That makes sense. Like, how can you, yeah, like what, because this is the thing, like, how can you make it to where everyone is aware of a support system, or everyone is kind of like has eyes on each other to say, hey, you know what, like, are you okay? Like, what does it take to create that environment in our culture, in our community, to where it's not so easy to let one person slip through the cracks and then another person, rise above it and just say, hey, it was just natural selection, right? Like this person is just different,
right?
As opposed to this person just doomed to be what they're becoming. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think one thing is what you and I do is having a platform that brings up these conversations and these topics. So it's not such a foreign or scary thing to be aware of. And that's number one. Number two, having a support system and educating people to say, this is not behavior that's acceptable, and when you see it, call it out. It's not going to be the huge agencies that are getting paid or have all these grant fundings, which I should be careful because I work for one, but it's not necessarily going to be huge agencies like this. It's going to be the intimate conversations that you have with your brother, that you have with your cousin, that you have with your sister. Like I've had many conversations where I've been called out with, that behavior is probably not the best if you're thinking about doing this. You know what I'm saying? So there has to be a safe place, a safe space, and people have to be made aware that what's healthy and not healthy, and just given the numbers, statistically, we're killing each other, literally. And we have to stop. And I love that question. So I'm going to have Nicole chime in on that as well. What type of environment is needed to allow people to have these conversations that we're having today, so it doesn't seem so foreign or scary to them?
So for me, I think I completely agree with Nick as far as the self-awareness goes, but I see in women, I'm speaking of as a woman, I see my sisters acting out of pain. So for example, if they see their grandmother that was kind of submissive and didn't stick up for themselves, they think that they're being more self-aware, and so they do the exact opposite, and they overproject and they're loud and they think they're speaking up. And so I think we need to be aware, one, sharing our stories so people can identify with their own pain, like I see that pain in myself and starting to address it. But then two, trying to find like, okay, when I heal this wound, it looks like what? Because I think, with women thinking about being a wife and a submissive wife, to swing to the opposite, and we got this hot girl culture and blah, 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 and just, promiscuously having sex, I think it's the opposite of effect, and it's not healthy for the culture. So part of me wants to recognize what the issue is and then find a healthy balance to that pain, to that trauma, because swing into the opposite, having more masculine women because they don't want to be like their mother, or more promiscuous women because they don't want to be like their grandmother. I don't think that is pulling the culture forward. I think it's actually pulling it behind. And I'm sure there's the same dynamic on the Black males. But I think that they need to identify, like, yes, I have an issue. The way I handle blah is not normal. So start there. And, we need to start talking about what the norm is. Like, it's okay to, in the moment of when you're feeling heightened emotionally, to pause and figure out, where is this coming from? Is it coming from the person in front of me, or is it coming from some past pain that I didn't deal with? That's okay. You don't need to pop back and argue back and blah, blah, blah. You can pause and reflect on yourself and then address whatever the issue is later. Those types of things within your own self, being reflective there and figuring out, yes, this is a pain point. Yes, this is a trauma event. And how can I process this in a healthy manner? That's what I think is lacking.
That's awesome. And it's also everything that we talked about, kind of hinting on the next talking point. But I do want to throw out the phrase I always tell people that I've done counseling with: practice the pause. Just practice the pause. Like, for you, it might seem like 5 seconds is taking forever, but to the person, it's literally just a few seconds. And it might stop you from reacting in a way you might never be able to come back from. So practice the pause. So I always throw that out to people.
And practicing the pause can actually be the difference in how you wanted your message to be received. So if you are ready to go at somebody and has some anger tones, that person's not going to receive whatever it is you're trying to say. Versus you practice the pause, allow yourself to calm down and respond in an intelligent manner, that person is going to respond in a much better manner. So those types of things are like part of the healing, part of figuring out, like, I was speaking out of anger. I need to practice the pause so I can speak out of intelligence first.
Exactly, because all communication is not effective.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
It's not effective. And
but it takes a lot of okay.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is you got to kind of put your pride in your pocket, right? Like, it's like, do you want to be right, or do you want to get your point across? You know what I mean? Like, do you want to communicate, or do you want to be right?
Right.
It's kind of like in training day, you want to go, like training day, you want to go to jail, you want to go home. Like, you want to make the point and just be seen as right, or do you want to make a connection with somebody? So I think a lot of it is also, a lot of that, putting away that bravado, like that, trying to subsidize, your anxiety and your traumas with like this, braggadocious, prideful perspective and approach to everything.
Absolutely. And I'm about to put you back on the hot seat here, Nick. So with all the statistics that we were just talking about, and some are very scary. And like Nicole was saying, sometimes, we're Black females right now are getting slack about being too masculine. And I'm like, well, damn it, maybe we're scared. Maybe it's a protection mode, because I don't know, over 90% of us are being killed by our partners. You know what I'm saying? So, and I had a discussion with I guess I'll call him a gentleman. I had a discussion with somebody last year, and we were going back and forth. And I said, right now, for me as a Black woman, who is the most dangerous person to me on the planet? And he's like, I don't know, what, blah, blah, blah. And he was just throwing things out. I said, no, you. And he was like, what do you mean? I said, the Black man is the most dangerous person on the planet for a Black female. And that should not be. That should not be. And then he was getting upset. And I always say, when I'm doing my trainings, don't get mad at me, get mad at what's causing these statistics. You know what I'm saying? So my question for you, Nick, and then I'm going to throw it to Nicole. What are some ways what are some things we can do within our community? And we already kind of hinted on some of the stuff, but in our community as a whole or within the house, what are some things that we can do to get people to see what's going on and to make a change? I feel like I should be playing Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror.
You can edit that in there.
Yeah.
So I think it's vulnerability. And I was kind of thinking about that as Nicole was talking. It's like you have, so again, like it comes back to self-love, right? Like if you're trying to, the squeaky wheel needs to grease, right? So if I'm always trying to like bolster myself up and make myself whatever, I'm trying to convince you of something that I've yet to convince myself of. And so I think being able to be vulnerable and say, hey, look, I was in that position and I was, it made me sad, or I cried, or, I was, maybe I was being, emotionally abusive, and I realized that down the road. It's just like being vulnerable and open about it. So it's like you can connect with somebody because I feel like the emotional reaction to that kind of stuff is the same, right? So if I was to say I was, emotionally abusive, or say if I was physically abusive, and and I said, hey, I felt insecure about myself, and I kind of took it out on my spouse, and I did that and whatever, then someone else on the other hand that's maybe thinking about doing it, or that makes sense to them as a good decision, then they'll kind of bring them down and say, hey, well, man, like that's not, I know how you feel, so I could respect what you're saying. And now to prevent myself from going down that path, then I can, take the action that you may have taken because you are vulnerable with me about what it is that you did, right? And so kind of like what we're doing now, like we've been having these vulnerable conversations. And I think, I don't know, I just feel like people are wired to do what's good, right? Like if, no one has ever robbed a bank thinking like this is a terrible idea. This is like the worst thing we've ever done. We finna go to jail. We're not gonna see our families no more. And so it's just like, you got to understand that people do what they do, even if it's bad, because they've convinced themselves that it's good. So we need to, like the education piece you were talking about, like we need to educate each other on what is good, like what is actually healthy and what that looks like. So you're not quickly trying to subsidize, what to be good with what feels good in the moment. And so I just think
that's a good one. Yeah.
So I think the vulnerability is honest, and it's not just from the victim side, but the victimizer as well. You know what I mean? Like you got to say, look, man, I hit her because I was, mad about this, whatever, or I was insecure about me or whatever, or I was broke and I just, I couldn't know how to communicate that to whatever, or, or I was whatever. So I think everyone involved has to do that. I think it was Dave Chappelle did a stand-up and he was talking about how Nelson Mandela was dealing with apartheid. And he said everyone that participated in the system are actually victims, and you need to be treated as such so everyone can sit down in a safe space and say, this is how I participated in this system. And so I think, and when it comes to this, like you can't, yes, someone that's victimizing or being abusive or a murderer or whatever, yes, like that is bad. However, this person wasn't created to be a murderer. This person wasn't created to be an abusive person. So what happened to them,
right,
to get them to this space? And then let's talk about it. And in a way where it's a safe space to say for a victim to say, hey, I was abused. Well, you got to allow the same safe space for a victimizer to say, this is why I was abusive. And then let's figure it out. Why this person that was a sweet child growing up, a baby that everyone loved turned into this abusive person. Like that's just not natural. Something had to happen to that baby that became a man or a woman to make them think that this is good for me to do.
Right. Absolutely. And it's kind of like how, sadly, when we have to sit on fatality reviews, and basically a fatality review is looking at the murder and then working backwards to see what happened, what occurred, but having this done before the murder, having this done at the first sign of abuse, at the first sign of trauma, and focusing. People don't understand trauma can impact somebody for the rest of their life. And if the longer there's a space between the event of the trauma to when that person gets help, or if they get help, it gets harder and harder to pinpoint what occurred in ways to work within that space. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I'm going to throw this to Nicole. What are some ways within our home, within our house, that we can address this?
Nick, you took my word. Vulnerability is my word. So
that is her word. I'm surprised she didn't come at you through the camera, because that is her word.
But yes, we definitely need to be vulnerable. But what I'm finding is so important, and people don't do this enough, is to listen. Just be quiet and listen. Stop trying to listen to respond. Just listen to what the person is saying. And like a lot of times people just want to be heard. So let them talk and talk and talk and talk and allow them the space to get whatever it is off of their chest. That's part of their processing. You are helping them process whatever it is they're trying to get off their chest. And when we interject with, how or why or anything to take away from their experience, their thoughts, or their feelings, we are preventing that healing process. So when we get, in these clubhouse rooms, or we get, in different spaces where people are being vulnerable with how they came to this conclusion or what their feelings are, and we interject and nitpick, or you did this because you did that, and that's our own stuff. So just pause and allow that person to go ahead. I'm here to listen, to allow you space to go ahead and get this out, get it out. And then, once you're done talking or venting or whatever it is, then we can discuss either moving forward or what are we going to do with those things. I think it's imperative for us to listen to each other, and that's something that us as Black people, it's kind of lost. I have been in a few clubhouse rooms where the clubhouse room specifically says, men, what do you think about blah, blah, blah. The stage is filled with women. The people talking are women. And then when a man comes on stage to talk, they don't allow the man to talk. So I think it's imperative that we, as a culture, just stop and listen to each other. We can do more with listening from each other than talking about each other.
I agree. And mine's going to be straight to the point. That's kind of what I do, right? Straight to the point. My way to address some of these issues is therapy. Like therapy, people. And when I say therapy, I know people are like, well, some people I can't afford that. I can't find a therapist. Like that's a huge issue. And one of the reasons I'm in the program I am for my doctorate is because we need more people of color providing the service, because that has an impact. I've had multiple people say, if I can't get an appointment with you, then I'm not going to do it, because I feel even though you might not relate to me on a level of everyday life, you were another Black female. So there's some commonality there that I can use some phrases, I can say some things. We have a unique historical connection that makes it easier to share my story. And I get that. But therapy is not necessarily always sitting on the sofa in front of somebody taking notes, which they really shouldn't be taking notes when you're talking, but it's not always that. Therapy can be painting. Therapy could be singing, poetry, songwriting. Some of my best therapeutic work comes out through my artwork. Therapy could be having lunch or dinner with your friend. It's a way to process emotions and get an outsider's support through whatever it is you're going through. So when I do say, and I say therapy a lot on my podcast, does not necessarily have to be with somebody you have to pay an insurance or copay to. Find what works for you, because everything doesn't work for everybody. I don't do good and talk therapy. I don't. I need an expressive therapy. So I have to use my hands. I have to be kinetic, and I have to do things that get it out of my head, and it processes stuff through artwork. So find out what works for you, to where you're practicing the pause. Like Nick said, you're being vulnerable. Like Nicole said, you're having space to communicate and allow yourself to be heard, and give that safe respect back to let somebody speak, and find what therapeutic element works for you. So those are some ways that we can address that. And as we come to our end, I want to thank Nick for being here and being a light. Like, I really feel you have given me a lot of hope, because when I came into this topic, I was like, I don't know how we're going to get through this one today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for having the confidence in me to go discuss this topic with you.
You did amazing, because I mean, you're on the call with two Black females and we're talking about you being the danger. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that you were able to say, look, we're going to have this authentic, vulnerable conversation, it gives me hope that there's many more like you out here, that we can turn the Titanic around. Because I don't want to look at a Black man and say, I'm scared of you. I'm scared that you're going to hurt me. I don't want to do that. I want unity and say, look what we can do together. So thank you for being that light for me. But go ahead and let our listeners know where they can find you and what amazing things you got coming up.
So thank you again. So you can find me at Instagram, podcast _fruit. Also, you can find the podcast episodes on all platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker. So pretty much anywhere you can find Google Podcasts, you can find podcasts. And so I just wrapped season 1. So I have 10 episodes. The last episode was the knowledge of mortality, where I talk about how the loss of my grandmother kind of made me hone in on the value of life. And then I'm going to be working on season 2 here pretty soon. So I'll be hopefully getting that out no later than the beginning of next year. But I'm looking forward to having those discussions, having other people on to, share their stories of how they had those eureka bite of the apple moments of what changed their lives.
Absolutely. And if you haven't, wow, really? I think the universe agrees. If you haven't listened to mortality or any of his episodes, definitely go over there. He has a lot of complementary topics that we discuss on this end. You'll definitely love it. It's some very good information, and it's healing, right? It's always good when you can put headphones on and get healing through the process of just listening to someone's story, because you find a commonality there. So I'm thankful that you shared your talents with us today, but that you're just sharing your talent, period. Because a lot of individuals don't understand, as being creatives, when we do content, we are putting our soul out here for consumption, right? And that takes a level of bravery. So thank you.
It's like Erykah Badu said, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my stuff.
Yes. And most Pisces are, speaking from experience. So Nicole, what are your last thoughts and any call to action on this topic?
So for me, as a Black female, I would just like the call to action for my brothers to, I say it with a heavy heart, but protect us. If you see one of your brothers, doing bad, hold them accountable, bring their attention to their behavior and the damage that they're potentially causing, because as a victim multiple times, there were people that saw what was happening to me, specifically other men that saw what was happening to me and didn't do anything. And so it caused me, as a Black female moving forward, to kind of feel like I needed to be independent and protect myself. And so it would be nice if brothers protect us sisters. If you see something, say something, not necessarily to the police, but to each other, call out that behavior for what it is. If it's abusive, say it's abusive. Don't try to make it cool or condone it with your homie, your uncle, your cousin, your friend. Just call it what it is and bring their attention to the behavior, because that can perpetuate the generational trauma and pass that down in more ways than just one woman. So please protect us. That's what I would like.
I love it. And I'm going to echo that as well. Like, we are begging for protection. It's enough going on outside of the house. We get pulled over too, guys. We're terrified too when we see the blue lights. We've been killed by police officers' hands. We are not getting paid as much as anybody when we're doing the same amount of work, when you're looking at our white counterparts or even our Black male counterparts. Like, we have enough outside the house we have to fight against. We don't need to come home and fight and get beaten or murdered. So what Nicole is saying, like, protect us. And once you realize, when we feel safe enough to be vulnerable, you will have a different experience with us. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. But we have to feel safe. And when you're yelling and screaming and throwing things or just providing an environment where we feel it's a threat, we are going to behave as if we're being threatened. So I feel that this topic actually is probably dense enough for a part two, probably going into the next season. But it's definitely something that we need to have conversations about. And like Nicole said, say something. If you see your friend, your family member, say something. The change happens in the intimate conversations, not on television, not on these big, courtrooms or these anger management classes. It happens in these intimate conversations where you can pull your friend, your cousin, whomever aside and say, what are you doing? Sometimes it takes the voice of somebody the closest to you to say, stop. So protect us, speak to your people. We need to be unified as a couple, and let's make Black love like a real thing, because until those numbers come down, until those numbers of over 90% of Black females being killed by a Black man decreases, when I hear the term hashtag Black love, I don't know, got a lot of heartburn there. Got a little heartburn. Like we can't put lipstick on a pig. You can't paint a house that's burning down, right? You can't close the door when the house is on fire. The house is still going to burn. So with all those cliches, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for getting to this part of the podcast. That means you enjoyed what you heard. So go ahead and leave us a review. I would love it. Secondly, if you want to find us outside of the recording world, you can hit us up on our website, www.thelookingglass.fans, and our Instagram page and Facebook page, both under the Looking Glass podcast. If you have been listening to the creative challenge that we are doing currently for October, I hope you're enjoying that. And like I said before, if you haven't already, go over to Forbidden Fruit Podcast and show him some love. Show him some love. You will not be disappointed. So with that, I'm wrapping it up. Everybody out there, you guys stay safe, take care, and be well.